If all these stories have you wanting to go on your own adventure and you don't want to spend a ton of money and you don't want to take a ton of time away from work and family, I highly encourage you to check out Lost Travel Company. They do trips all over the country, everything from biking to rafting to kayaking, hiking, etc. And on each trip, there's an official start line and an official finish line, but getting between locations is totally up to you. However you want to do it, however you want to carry your gear, it's a total free-for-all in between. And it is a group trip, but they're very small groups. So you get to know people, but you can also easily practice social distancing. So a lot of the trips are still happening. And like I said, they're very affordable, very easy to get out and go do because they have figured out a lot of the logistics for you, but it still leaves so much room for adventure to happen. And with each trip, they give back 5% of the total trip as a donation to the area where the trip is happening. So if you'd like to find out more, go to lost.travel and use the code ADVENTURESPORTS for 10% off any of the trips listed. If you're suffering from stress, anxiety, lack of sleep, inflammation, pain management, kind of like I am pretty much all the time, I highly encourage you to check out cocanacare.com. And that's C-O for Colorado. It's a Colorado-based company. Canna, C-A-N-N-A, care.com. They make incredible CBD oil that's derived from all natural, high-quality industrial hemp. It's legal in all 50 states and is USDA certified 100% organic. And there's absolutely no THC content in the oil. It's non-GMO and contains no heavy metals or pesticides. They've been gracious enough to help support us during this time. So if you're wanting to try CBD oil for any of those reasons I mentioned and a lot more on their website, I highly encourage you just to give it a shot. Check it out. Go to cocanacare.com. And again, that's C-O for Colorado, C-A-N-N-A care.com.
At that point, I literally had my finger hovering over the button, the call button on my VHF radio so I could call for help. That was my first line of defense if I needed to call for help.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, where we hear stories of adventure from every corner of the planet. We interview all sorts of folks who are using their sport to explore the world around them and give you the inspiration you need to get out there and have some fun. Hey folks, sorry for the late post. Still out on the road on a cross-country bike tour. It's a relay, as you probably heard. I've mentioned it in pretty much every show in the last month or so. I'm doing part of the coordinating and driving with my partner Nick Brown. We both work for Athletic Brewing, and we're doing this cross-country tour from our brewery in Connecticut to our brewery in San Diego. Y'all have heard me talk about it plenty of times. It's non-alcoholic beer that we brew. So if you'd love to try it or interested, go check it out, athleticbrewing.com. But we're doing this trip, and I just realized I look at the last 10 episodes or so, and they've all been biking related. So I wanted to do something a little different. And we've been talking a lot about water and kayaking, and just we're out in the middle of Cheyenne, Wyoming right now, so not a lot of water. And especially there's a lot of fires going on, wildfires. So we're waiting out the smoke, but trying to get some miles in and continue biking to San Diego. But we wanted to just kind of mix it up. So this is a throwback from last year with Susan Marie Conrad. She did a 1,200-mile kayak trip along the Inside Passage, pretty much from it was Seattle to Alaska. And she wrote a book about it called, here, let me pull it up. It's called Inside, One Woman's Journey Through the Inside Passage. I've read the book. She's such a pleasure to have on, and so I hope you enjoy this episode, mixing it up a little bit and doing a replay today. I'll have brand new episodes for you ready to go in the next few weeks. We just, it's a lot of work coordinating this trip across country, and we've got a couple weeks left, but it's going great, and there will be plenty of stories to tell after it's over. But enjoy the episode, and you'll be hearing us again on Thursday. All right, everybody, so welcome to the show. Today we have a sport that we've been featured a few times here and there, but not a ton, sea kayaking, and basically what that entails is kayaking on the ocean. And today we are featuring somebody who's done an expedition with that, which was the Inside Passage. And her name is Susan Conrad, and she'll explain more of what it is. She is a sponsored athlete by a company called Exped. And she just did this epic journey that she wrote a book about, and we'll be talking about all of that. Susan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So you did the Inside Passage. For someone that doesn't know what that is, could you just explain it real quick?
Yeah, sure. So the Inside Passage, it's a coastal route. It's an extraordinary coastal route, actually, that starts in the southern Puget Sound area of Washington State. And it essentially connects that area to the Panhandle in Southeast Alaska. So it's about roughly a 1,300-mile connector. So there's a lot of water going on there, a lot of paddle strokes that can take place. It's also a major transportation route, of course, for goods traveling between Seattle and Alaska, and real popular cruising route. And, the BC ferries, Alaska ferries, cruise ships, every imaginable tug and freighter and barge and recreational vessel and, all that ply those waters. So you can have your moments or days and even weeks of pretty intense solitude, or you can have this real kind of busy nautical thoroughfare. It's definitely a land of contrast.
Wow. So you weren't ever really alone out there. At least you might have been the only kayaker, but not the only vessel.
Yeah, there were days where, I might see another boat in passing in the really remote areas further north, just maybe wave to a fisherman or something. But yeah, there was probably close to a 10-day stretch where I refer to it as where I lived in this social vacuum where I, hardly saw another human being for that whole spell.
Holy cow, that sounds awesome. So before we really get into the journey itself, where are you coming from today?
I live not too far from where I took my first strokes of this adventure, near the Puget Sound. Actually, a little community called Oso, which is a little further inland, just kind of at the base of the North Cascades. So I've got the best of both worlds. Within minutes, I can be hiking in the mountains, or I can set my boat out on the salt water and go for a paddle.
Wow. I've said this before. Listeners probably get tired of me saying that. I think that area, especially like around the North Cascades, is probably one of the most underrated areas in the country. I just don't feel like I hear about it a lot. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I'm sure maybe, since you live there, you don't feel that way. But being out here, I just didn't know anything about it growing up on the East Coast. And when I first saw it, I'm like, this looks like the stinking Alps. Like, how is this not more famous?
Yeah, absolutely. I had the same experience. I lived in Montana for 20 years, and which in itself is just absolutely gorgeous. But I started making these treks to get my saltwater fix, and that would bring me right over the Cascades. And I'm just like, holy cow, look at this place. It's just drop dead gorgeous. And of course, I eventually ended up, after living in Montana for 20 years, and then I did this expedition. And about a year later, I had to be closer to the saltwater. So that's what brought me here.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That's probably, that's one of the greatest meetings of mountains and ocean in the country is that area. It's gorgeous. And
absolutely.
So how did you, what did you grow up doing as far as sports? Were you into sea kayaking, or did you discover it later in life?
Yeah, no, I was, it's kind of ironic because, first of all, my parents did a really good job at instilling fear of water in me, because my cousin had drowned. She was 5 years old and I was 4 at the time. And so she had drowned, my father's niece, and I guess he had just decided at that point that his daughter was not going to reach, or have the same demise. And so they forbid me to go near water, all of my youth growing up. But, of course, what do kids do when they're told not to do something? I almost gravitated towards water and
you must give them panic attacks now.
Yeah. I was a very defiant little girl, and would always sneak away and get water fixes whenever I could. But no, I was not an athletic child. I was the textbook klutz kid, always the last or next to the last to be picked for all the team sports. And, that really affected my self-confidence and self-image. And I think that's why I always gravitated more toward the individual sports. When I got a little older, I really took to skiing and bicycling and running, trail running, and that sort of thing. But I didn't set foot in a kayak until I was 30 years old. And that was on a large lake in Montana, a 30-mile long massive lake that sits just at the base of the Rockies, just drop dead gorgeous, called Flathead Lake. And so that was my first experience. And I was just like, I wouldn't say I was a natural at it, but I had a friend who was coaching me. And I'd say within an hour or so, I started feeling really comfortable and thought, wow, I could see myself doing this. It was something that I actually picked up pretty easy, and that I eventually got, really comfortable and confident at. So that's where it all began when I was 30 years old. And then I started guiding for an outfitter in Montana. Did that for about 10 years. And then I got this crazy idea to start my own company. And I ran my own kayak company for about another 10 years. So we did a lot of whitewater, of course, but we also would bring clients to the San Juan Islands and do guided trips. And that was sort of my introduction to, saltwater paddling in a more extensive sort of way.
Man, 20 years worth of experience guiding as well. That is awesome. That has to be just an incredible way to spend your time, taking other people to see that, usually probably for the first time.
Yeah. Well, of course we would do scope out trips before we brought paying clients there, just so.
Well, for them, it's their first time probably doing anything like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was, and that's what I really loved was, sharing my passion of this sport and getting people in the great outdoors and just seeing the wow factor just written all over their faces and their body language. It's just like it's nothing like it.
So what is it for you about being on the water and being in this vessel that's maybe different than other things you've done? I'm sure you've hiked and maybe ridden a bike some or done other things. What is it about the water for you?
Yeah, I think that first time I got into that kayak on that mountain lake, I immediately recognized its potential for solitude and just obviously just getting out on the water. But when I was introduced to multi-day trips, it's like, wow, not only can you go out on these, single day forays, but you can pack everything that you need in these kayaks and, disappear for days or even weeks at a time. So just like everything I needed to survive was either on my person or in that kayak. And that really spoke to me. It was like, this is like backpacking on the water, but without the heavy weight on your shoulders.
That is so funny. Yeah.
Yeah. So that really spoke to me. And that's how I started getting into these, little mini adventures. I'd take off for a long weekend, and then that long weekend turned into a week, and then, 2 weeks. And, and I had a dear friend, who had done the Inside Passage actually in 1992. And he had introduced me to, little sections of it, 100 miles here, 100 miles there. And that's where I really discovered wilderness paddling. And eventually he became my mentor, and I eventually connected the dots and I decided that I wanted to do that whole trip from beginning to end, from top to bottom, or I should say bottom to top. I went south to north and connect all those dots and paddle the Inside Passage.
Oh man. So it was all uphill then going north.
Yeah.
I'm sure you heard that a few times.
All uphill. Yeah.
No, I did a similar thing I loved a bike tour, and it's the same thing like you were saying. It's a lot like backpacking. But you can it's a little more solitude because there aren't nearly as many people usually out there doing the same thing. And for you, your trail is essentially wherever the water is. I mean, I know you got to watch out for things, but you don't have to stick to this trail necessarily. No one's going to get onto you when you go, quote, off trail because you're not going to mess anything up.
Exactly. And it's not like, the PCT or any kind of a long distance hiking trail where there's, this definitive beginning and end, and you hike, and it's an obvious trail, and you drop your pack and you set up camp. It's obviously not like that on the Inside Passage.
Right, right. And I've heard you don't, now this, I don't know anything about sea kayaking, but we had a guy a few weeks ago talking a little bit about it. And he said one thing he likes about it is he doesn't have to be nearly as particular about the weight as a backpacker might have to be, as far as like ounces and fractions of ounces. Is that true?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The boats can hold these full-on expedition kayaks. Mine was 18 feet, 4 inches long, 21 inches wide, real long and narrow, but it could hold more than probably the biggest backpack. And yeah, weight isn't an issue. Actually, if you pack it properly, so that it doesn't list to one side or the other, which is really critical, but it's actually more stable. It creates ballast in the boat. And let's see, we kayakers, we like to eat. We like to bring our bottles of wine and an occasional, bottle of beer or whatever along. And
wow.
So yeah. As long as you distribute the weight evenly. And of course, you don't want to bring the kitchen sink because you have to deal with every fistful of gear that you end up bringing with you. Excuse me.
Yeah, true. No, I totally get it. The bicycle's the same way. If I want a jar of peanut butter, guess what? I'm buying a jar of peanut butter and I'm throwing it in there because it's really not going to make a huge difference. And that bike definitely can hold a lot more than my shoulders are willing to. So I definitely enjoy that side of it as well. Well, neat. So you got the idea for the Inside Passage, and you said you guided for a decade at a time, and then you started your business for a decade. So how old were you when you decided to do this?
I was, that was one of many reasons that I decided to do this. I was approaching the big 50. I was 49, and I wanted to do something, somewhat substantial before I turned that milestone birthday with a big fat 0 in it. So
that's awesome. That's fantastic. That is so cool to me. I'm a little ways away, but just knowing that, these incredible, really life-altering adventures really don't have to be done while you're in college, and they don't have to be done, before you have a really involved career even. They can right. be later on if that's what your life is the trajectory of it is. And wow. So yeah, so once you got the idea, you ended up starting in the Puget Sound and going north up to Alaska. Man, what was it like to plan for that? Was it difficult? But I know you probably had a lot of the gear and experience, but still, was it challenging for you to put all that together?
Yeah, I was pretty adamant about the preparation phase. I spent the good part of 10, 11 months preparing for this. So, on all those levels that you would imagine. So physically, of course, I wasn't in the best of shape when I got this idea. So I spent the next 10, 11 months just, of course, paddling. I started logging, hundreds and hundreds of miles of training miles paddling. And then I would alternate that with trail running or mountain biking. I'm not a gym rat by any means, but I did join a gym. I really wanted to focus on my core and my leg strength because, so many people think that kayaking is just exclusively an upper body sport, but it really isn't. You really engage your whole body, your core, and even your lower body when you're really putting in those long miles. And I was essentially paddling the equivalent of a marathon, most days, day after day after day for 66 days. So I just reasoned that the success of the trip would really hinge on me taking my first strokes, being in the best shape that I possibly could. And that worked out pretty well for me. But, also the food component was huge. I had, I think 4 or 5 dehydrators going 24/7 for months, leading up to the trip.
Oh, wow. So you did all that yourself.
I did, and I brought lots of pastas and rice, and instant mashed potatoes was one of my all-time favorite standbys.
Oh, heck yeah.
But Yeah,
Love
but I'm
that
not a
stuff.
big fan of the pouch meals that you can buy, like Mountain House and things like that. So big fan of dehydrating. I just like to know what's in my food, and I'm also very kind of sentimental and nostalgic. Like I remember I'd be slicing up oranges or apples and thinking, holding it in my hand and looking at it like, wow, I'm going to actually be eating this in Alaska, one of these days soon. So
That's
that
really
was all.
cool.
Yeah, that was all part of the process. And, getting the gear around, of course, since I had owned my own company, I was fairly well set with really good gear, but also I needed to get a little more well-versed on the electronics, the GPS. I also decided to use a spot satellite tracking device so that my friends and family could follow along and log on to Google Earth and see where I was at, any given time. And just kind of brush up on my seamanship skills, boat handling skills, make sure I had my bomber roll going. And yeah, so there's a lot of elements involved in that preparatory phase for sure.
So what was it like that first day when you set out, and where was that?
Yeah, so that was Anacortes, Washington, which is, it's about an hour, maybe hour and a half drive north of Seattle in the Puget Sound. And so I started from a beautiful little park called Washington Park. So it's the gateway to the San Juan Islands is how Anacortes is promoted. And it was a very memorable day. 6 of my best friends came to see me off, and they came from the East Coast. I grew up in upstate New York. My best friend surprised me, came out from New York to be on the beach that day. I had a friend come down from British Columbia, friends from Washington State. And, we did the obligatory bottle of champagne and christened my bow and had this really wonderful little ceremony. And, they helped carry the boat and got it floating. And I slipped into the cockpit and put my spray skirt around the rim of the cockpit and sealed myself in and took my first strokes and looked back at them and said, hey, I guess I'm doing this. I'll see you in 3 months.
What a crazy feeling. Oh,
it
my
really
gosh.
was. It was wild. I was ready. And I was just, talk about, like they say, a runner's high, I don't think I've replicated that feeling, since. It was just such an amazing feeling to paddle away.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. But a lot of our listeners listen to this show because they maybe never experienced that, and they want to know what that's like. I think you'd agree. We cannot encourage you, listeners, enough. Every one of you, it is our hope that you feel that feeling at least one time in your life, because it's hard to recreate, honestly, and especially for the first time. But when you train for something so diligently and you prepare and you financially prepare and you get everything together and it's months and months and months, and then you go, I don't know about it, how it is for you. Just so many things are not what you expect, as well as so many things are what you expect, being there and setting off. And then it's just this crazy sensation once you realize I'm here and I'm doing it and I'm all alone now. Like once you start paddling away, you're like, I'm for the next 3 months, I'm out here. This is crazy.
Yep. This is what I signed up for. And, so many people ask me about the whole fear component, weren't you afraid? Aren't you scared? And I think Rosa Parks said it best: once one's mind is made up, fear diminishes. I think that's how it went. And it's like, my mind was made up. I was a woman on a mission. And, of course, there were fears, being totally honest, as a woman paddling the Inside Passage by myself, I entertained a few fears, but I think because I was so prepared, I almost felt like incorrigibly prepared. So I think that helped mitigate some of the, the risks, the potential risks and the resulting fears from those risks. But, I had a lot of fears, like that the seas would kick up and maybe I'd capsize, and then, hypothermia, drowning. I feared, like I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of shipping traffic on parts of the route. So it's like, God, am I going to get run over by a big ship or, even a small ship? I feared bears. I had a lot of encounters with very territorial mama grizzly bears up in the further reaches of the route. One of my biggest fears was that of men with ill intentions. Like when I got closer to these resupply ports of call and was, coming into civilization. All these different fears, but I had a couple of strategies in dealing with them. And what seemed to work the most for me was to, continually ask myself if the fear that I was experiencing, was it directly proportionate to what was actually happening in front of my bow or in front of my face if I was on land. So, like, in other words, was it a real valid threat that demanded immediate action, or was it just a perceived threat, which was usually the case, that I'm basing this on the assumption that something or someone might harm me. So it was really, for me, it was about, compartmentalizing my fears and sometimes just having a blatant disregard for them and just like, okay, you really don't exist, and just putting in a box, so to speak. And it's like, hey, this is what I signed up for. This is what I'm doing. So onward and upward.
Wow. No, that's good. That's good. I mean, honestly, doing something like that, there's a million things you could be fearful of simultaneously all the time. And that's life. I mean, you kind of just have to cross bridges when you get to them. When you're in the middle of the Puget Sound, there's no real use of worrying about grizzlies in that moment. I mean, they can't get to you when you're 5 miles offshore. But, that is something to worry about when it's right there in front of your face and deal with it then. But, man, that's really good. So, wow, you definitely prepared well and mentally prepared well, it seems like, as well. Speaking of fear, was it what did anything happen where you had to use those strategies and get out of danger, like immediately?
Well, I never capsized. I came close a few times.
And what would you do if you did? I don't know a whole lot about it, to be honest.
Yeah, well, at that time, my role was pretty bomber because I had gone out in real conditions, wearing the full-on armor that, the full wetsuit, the dry top, all the gear, the neoprene booties, the hat, the neoprene skull cap, the gloves, because I'm paddling on 50-degree water and my boat is fully loaded. It's probably 150 pounds of boat and gear, plus myself in there. And then everything I would have on the deck, the deck bag, the compass, the spare paddle, all those items. And I would go out in real conditions and capsize on purpose, in training, of course. And capsize and roll and roll and roll until I was just, dizzy and beside myself. And then, rolls do fail. So I would also practice bailing out intentionally and doing what they call a deep water reentry. So, getting back into the kayak and, reattaching the skirt, bilging the water out, and then being on your way. And, it's one thing to do it in a calm environment. A lot of people practice in pools, but it's a whole different ball of wax when you're out there in real conditions. So it's a mental gig too. So yeah, to answer your question, if I had, of course, I'd try to fire off a roll, try 2 or 3 times. And if that failed, I'm out of the boat and I'm, my training is hopefully going to kick in and I'm going to get my butt back in that boat and, and keep paddling. So, but fortunately that never happened. But other issues, I start the book off with what was probably the low light of the journey. Not probably, it definitely was the low light. It's the closest I'd come to aborting the whole trip. And let's see, I think I'm 36 or 37 days into the expedition, and I was going through this 50-mile long fjord in British Columbia. And it was, drop dead gorgeous part of the Inside Passage, but also the wildest and most remote section and also the steepest section. So this fjord, the cliff walls are going up anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 feet straight up. And so there's no place to come ashore, sometimes for 5 to 10 miles at a time. And then even if there was a place to come ashore, It's an area that's prone to extreme tidal differences. So, I'm talking, minus tides all the way up to like 23, 24 foot high tides. So these are little tiny pocket beaches where, there's no way that, it's just going to be underwater when the highest of the high tides come up in the middle of the night. And so I'm traveling up this fjord, and I'm looking at the chart on the deck of my kayak and trying to compare it with the terrain in front of me. And I'm thinking, oh, good, a couple more miles and I can get out of the kayak and set up camp. I think I can eke out a campsite here. It might be above the high tide line. And I come to that point, and there is a mama grizzly bear with 2 cubs on that little tiny beach. And she made it very clear that that was her beach. So, of course, I didn't even get out of the boat, and I kept paddling and paddling. And there wasn't any place to come ashore for about another 5 or 6 miles. And it was like the same scenario, though. I come to that next little beach thinking, okay, by now I've done about 33 miles. And it's like, I've got to get out of this boat. I've got to set up camp. The winds are kicking up. It's pouring rain. I'm starting to shiver. And I come around the corner, and the same scenario. There's another brown bear with 2 little cubs. So I'm like, all right. So I keep paddling. And, long story short, now I've reached the 40-mile mark. It's going to be dark soon. The winds are just whipping down this fjord, and it's getting pretty crazy. And it's just like, I've got to get out of this boat. And so I ended up having to make do with this extremely marginal camp. I mean, it was I always equate it to camping in a saltwater chicken coop, because it was it just smelled horrific. It was so mucky and so marshy. I mean, it was just trying to peel my neoprene boots off with every step. And I had to schlep my gear, all of my gear, and then eventually the kayak, through this expanse of gloppy nothingness for about the equivalent of a football field, maybe a little bit longer, until I could get above that high tide line. And I knew I didn't see any physical signs of bears, but I knew that they were there. So I was pretty nerve-wracked by that point. And I'm shivering. So I taught classes on hypothermia years ago. So I was aware that I was in trouble. And I'm trying to set up my tarp, and the wind is just, whipping the corners of the tarp out of my hands. And I'm fumbling, the beginning stages of hypothermia. I'm really struggling trying to secure the corners and tie the knots. And at that point, I mean, I literally had my finger hovering over the button, the call button on my VHF radio, so I could call for help. That was my first line of defense if I needed to call for help. And so I'm rehearsing what I'm going to say when the Coast Guard or whoever picks up the transmission on the other end. I'm rehearsing it out loud, in this gale force, horrific storm that's just come down this fjord. And that's when my ego kicked in, though. And I'm just thinking, how's this going to play out? I've put so much effort and time and money into this expedition. I'm about halfway through, and I'm going to bail. It's like, I don't think so. So I had a major epic meltdown, epic proportions, where I just start screaming at the top of my lungs. I mean, just it's like primal screams, and the forest is just reabsorbing the screams. It doesn't care. And I think something just snapped. My mental status just snapped. That was a good thing. It was like it was this life-giving rage, I think, is what was happening in that moment. And, I got over that hissy fit, and I just thought, okay, well, you've got yourself into this, Susan. You better put on your big girl panties and figure a way out. So, magically the tarp started cooperating. I got the tent set up, got the sleeping bag out, ingested a meager amount of calories compared to what I had expended that day, and climbed into the tent and pulled my hat over my eyes and just laid there and took a couple deep breaths and just convinced myself that I was going to wake up alive the next morning. And I did, of course. Woke up, and there was amazingly blue sky, and I packed up as fast as I'd ever packed up, I think, for that entire expedition, and I just got the heck out of Dodge.
What was that day like the next day?
The next day was magical. I had about only a
I knew
8-mile
it.
Yeah, 8-mile paddle. Yes, the contrast with the magic and the misery. So, after I'd been averaging 25, 30 miles most days on this trip, that previous day was 40 miles and a really hard 40 miles. Next day is only 8 miles into this little community called Una River. So now I'm just a little south. I'm about a 2-day paddle south of Prince Rupert, which is pretty good size port of call in British Columbia. And that was going to be my next resupply, where I'd come in and get the new food, the new charts, and rest up, grab a hot shower. But I ended up in this little tiny town of Una River, population of about 30 people. And I ran into some, actually 2 guys that owned a fishing boat, and they decided to sleep on their boat that one night that I was in Una River, and he put me up in his cabin in the woods. So here I go from this horrific experience to sleeping in this man's cabin. He'd got a fire going for me. I'm taking a bubble bath in his tub. I've got a glass of wine beside me. And I'm invited to this little party in the forest that evening, this little bonfire style party where I met some of the locals and just had this wonderful, wonderful experience. And I was also at that party, I was offered a ride into Prince Rupert. So that was about a 20-mile paddle into that resupply port of call that I really wasn't looking forward to paddling that stretch of water. It was notorious for being, pretty sketchy at times, and the weather was deteriorating again. So I was like, wow, really? He's like, yeah, you could just throw your boat on the back of our fishing boat. It was like a 37-foot gill netter, I believe. And he goes, yeah, we're going up to Prince Rupert to do some business. So just ride with us. So I'm like, okay, that sounds like a great idea. And it just shaved off that distance that I didn't want to paddle. But, then I started feeling a little sheepish about my decision the next morning when I'm getting ready to meet these guys down at the dock, because, it felt like cheating. I kept telling myself, God, I'd come here to paddle the inside passage, not hitch rides. But, in the end, I am so glad that I accepted that ride. I just went with my gut intuition on that one. And I made some new friends. It ended up becoming this adventure within an adventure. I've got this photo that they took of me down in the cockpit of their fishing boat. And I've got my arms around the guys, and I'm just like, I am absolutely ecstatic. You can tell that I am just high as a kite. And it was just one of those highlights of the adventure that was, back to back to the absolute miserable low light of the adventure.
It is funny how that works, and it is consistent. I've learned if you are having the worst day you could have ever imagined, chances are the next day is going to be one of the best. It's just, I don't know what it is, but
right.
I don't know if it just feels better because the day before was terrible. But yeah, to go from sleeping on that muddy, sketchy, probably bear-infested beach to in a cabin with a bubble bath and a glass of wine is two different worlds. It's two different worlds. And so that's the things that, that happen on an adventure like this. You cannot plan to meet people on that island, that little tiny island, and be there with people that you just met that are now friends at a bonfire and then get a ride. You cannot plan for that. But when you put yourself out there, man, so many just incredible things like that begin to happen.
That's the beauty of the adventure. And that seems like that's always the highlight. Any stories that I hear of people on land or water-based adventures, it's always the people that you meet along the way and how they typically will take you, under their wing, and they want to fatten you up. They want to feed you.
Yeah.
They want to give you wine or beer and a hot shower and do your laundry. Yeah. And it's just, I had a few experiences like that. And, that's what really sticks out. And so when you have the miserable experiences, when I laid in the tent that night and was, giving myself a pep talk, I was just like, okay, you can do hard, and this too shall pass. And if you just keep reminding yourself this too shall pass, you're on to the next highlight of the adventure.
That's right. It always passes. And, it makes the smallest joys that much better when you come across them. The next cup of coffee, the next warm bed, it's magic.
Yeah, that next bubble bath.
Yeah, that next bubble bath, exactly. Yeah, it definitely changes your worldview just to see how people treat others that are on an adventure. It's like people recognize when someone is doing something difficult and knows that it's for good reason and good cause, and they, gosh, it's just the best in humans comes out. It's awesome.
Yeah, I agree.
That is so cool. And so that was, you said, about almost halfway through the trip. And once you got through that, I'm sure there were other lows and other highs, but and you mentioned, animal encounters a few times. Did you have any really close calls with any sort of animals? Because you not only were you dealing with all the land animals, you're dealing with all the ocean animals too.
Yeah. Well, I had wonderful encounters with whales, both humpback whales and orcas or killer whales.
Oh man!
And I mean that's really magical. I think by the point that I did this expedition, I'd seen a fair number of whales in the wild, pretty close to my kayak, and actually go right underneath my boat. And those first experiences, many years ago, were pretty nerve-wracking. But then you get accustomed to it, and it's magical, and you just know and trust that these creatures are aware of your presence. They're not going to hurt you. I mean, yeah, there's a really slim chance that they could bump you, but I don't know if that has ever actually happened. But it never happened to me. But the humpbacks can get 30 or 40 feet in length and weigh up to 40 or even 50 tons. So they're massive. They just come lumbering by you. They just seem to appear out of nowhere. But they're a little more predictable in terms of their movements, how they oscillate through the water than the killer whales are. The killer whales usually travel in packs, and they're just really fast and aggressive. Not aggressive like toward me, but just their movements and how they're just playful and rambunctious. And they have teeth. They have these 6-inch long pearly white teeth that can be a little nerve-wracking when they're coming straight at you in this 6-foot tall dorsal fin. But I've got some great photos that I incorporate into my slideshow presentations of the whale encounters. Bears, not so magical. They are. I always call them grizzly bears because that's what they are in Montana. But the coastal variety they call them brown bears, and they're essentially the same species. Based on the research that I've done, but because of this rich salmon diet that they prefer, this really high fat, nutrient dense diet, the coastal brown bears can be up to twice the size of their inland compatriots in Montana. They're massive. And, I didn't have any bad encounters with them. I just saw so many of them, mostly as I was paddling and looking for places to camp, to the point where I was actually in tears a couple times. I'm paddling along and I come around a corner and there's a mama bear just like right there, moving logs and stones around, foraging and moving them like they're just pieces of styrofoam. And it's pouring rain, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to come ashore. And I just remember jabbing my paddle into the water and just like crying, like, this wasn't in the brochure. I want my money back. Sort of thing.
Oh my goodness. I love it. I love that even, tough cookie like you, you're broken down to tears out there. That's you're put in the place of like a child a lot of times. And I know exactly that feeling. This sucks. Everything about right now just sucks. And I'm going to cry.
And you're like, why am I doing this again?
Oh my gosh. That is, gosh, that is so true. That is too funny. Man, I just can't imagine the beauty. I'm looking at it on the map right now and just this incredible network of islands and mountains and ocean. And I just can't imagine what some of the highs felt like for you. We've been talking about a lot of lows. Was there a particular moment that stuck out that was just maybe the most alive you've ever felt?
Yeah, there are a few. Well, the what immediately comes to mind is the image that's on the cover of my book, where I've got the red kayak, and then there's these beautiful mountains in the background, and there's an iceberg right in front of the kayak. So that was toward the end of the expedition, and by that point, one of the reasons I wanted to paddle to Alaska is I wanted to see glaciers and icebergs, and boy, did I ever some icebergs. And on that particular day, it had been raining for a couple of days leading up to that day. And again, I was kind of feeling like a little down and out. And I knew that there were beautiful mountains out there, but I couldn't see them. And I was getting really frustrated. And I took a quick lunch break and I started paddling out of this bay, and the clouds just started lifting, and the fog started clearing out really quick. And so I stopped to take a quick break to stretch my legs. And that's when I turned around and just saw the peaks just in all their glow. The sun was hitting them just right. And it almost looks like I photoshopped it, but I didn't. There was this perfect cloud hovering over the Alaskan mountains, and this iceberg just very gently floats in between my kayak and this mountain view. And I snapped that photo. And, I never intended to write a book when I did this trip, but then fast forward a few years and it ends up being the cover photo, for the memoir that resulted from this expedition. So yeah, that was definitely a highlight. And my very last campsite was, also a highlight. It was, hands down my favorite campsite out of the entire trip. It was just one of those postcard perfect sites where, first there was no signs of bears. So that was a huge amenity of this site. I had a little babbling brook that came in near where my tent was. So having fresh water at a campsite is always a bonus. Wildflowers, like these brilliant pink wildflowers, were everywhere. And just sweeping views up toward Juneau, which was my final destination. And at that time, it was only 15 miles away now. So I'd paddled almost 1,200 miles. I've got 15 miles to go. And I'm just looking out at these snow-capped peaks and icebergs. And then to top it all off, the icing on the cake, just before I retired for the night, was a small pod of humpback whales had come into that bay, and they were playing in that bay actually for a few hours, to the point where I had to, at one point, I unzipped the tent because I'm trying to sleep, right? And I unzipped the tent and I'm like, "Hey guys, do you mind?"
Oh my gosh.
I'm trying to sleep here. It was so funny. It was just so magical.
You could die happy after a night like that.
Couldn't you though?
I mean, what percentage of people ever get to see something like that after experiencing something like that? I mean, that really is what people build their entire lives to experience, a moment like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I was a very lucky girl, for
that
sure.
That is so cool. Golly. And so yeah, you mentioned, I've heard you talk about it before in the book. You felt like you were maybe settling in life before you did this?
Yeah, I was. Going back to some of the reasons that I chose to do this in the first place. It was definitely a low point of my life. My father had recently died from the advanced stages of Alzheimer's, so that was really hard on me. And my long-term relationship had just fallen apart. So I ran this kayak company for 10 years with my partner, and we had it just dissolved. And so therefore the business dissolved. And so I had to walk away from that. So that paddle sports business had at that time defined me for 20 years. And so now here I am, I'm jobless, I'm fatherless, I'm very restless, and I just kind of lost my sense of where I belonged. And then also within a 3-month span, a close friend of mine died. And, it's just like trouble comes in threes, right? 3s or 4s. And then my cat got eaten by a coyote. I started sounding like a country western song.
Yeah, really. Yeah. I need to write some music. Dang.
Yeah. So I just, if it was anything, I needed a reset button. I needed to recalibrate myself because I was kind of resorting back to my self-defeating behaviors and just, making some really poor choices. And I just felt like I was settling in life at that time. And I've always been very goal oriented. And I just needed another goal. And so the Inside Passage, of course, became that goal. And I think we all strive to become better versions of ourselves. And I knew that there were going to be challenges on this trip. I just had no idea how profound they would be, but I knew that there would be adversity. And I think a big reason that I chose to do this was I wanted to see how that adversity would change me and how it would make me a better, stronger version of myself. And I think that's exactly what happened. And that's what I set out to do. And it worked.
Yeah. And so when you woke up on that last day after that incredible evening on the campsite, and you kayaked the rest of the way,
mm-hmm.
what was going through your head, and what did you feel like was different within you? I know it's hard to get perspective that close to the end, when you're that close to the event still, but what do you think had changed at that point?
Well, that's a good question. As I was approaching the quote unquote finish line, it was a mellow day, only had 15 miles. The weather was very reasonable. And I felt very accomplished, I was very content and happy and just, rewinding all that I had experienced, but just also, realizing that what I had done was, not really extraordinary. I mean, and paddlers, there's all kinds of crazy expeditions going on out there. Look at some of the people that you've interviewed that have rowed across entire oceans or circumnavigated entire continents and done all these crazy, crazy things. But, at the same time, I felt what I did was extraordinary, just in my own little bubble that I was living in. And I just remember, paddling into Juneau and there was no greeting committee. It was, and I knew that, there was nothing planned like the wonderful, poignant launching ceremony that my friends put together for me. So it was just me and my kayak and another quickly rising tide and a muddy bank and dealing with all my gear and actually a pretty crabby harbor master that wanted my kayak out of his way. I needed to pay him to leave it there for a few days. And then I had to cross 4 lanes of busy traffic to check into a motel and wait 3 days for the Alaskan ferry. That was my shuttle ride home. It only leaves once a week, and I definitely didn't want to miss that boat. And so I hung out for a few days and wheeled my kayak onto the ferry and rode that boat all the way back to Bellingham, Washington.
Got to basically enjoy the whole route again.
Yeah, that was pretty bizarre. So that rewound, it took me 66 days to paddle, rewound the entire trip at a much faster rate, of course, in 3.5 days from a quite a bit higher vantage point.
So you got to see it in a whole new way. And I mean, you could have sat there and talked anyone's head off. Like, I camped there that night. That's where I saw a bear. That's where this happened.
Yeah, for sure.
That is incredible. Golly. So, it's beautiful how when you get to the end of a journey like that, you're not, it's still adventure, meaning it's the unexpected. It's crossing a bunch of traffic. It's, dealing with people that don't give a crap about what you just did.
Mm-hmm, right.
And it's just funny how it is like that. Yeah, I've gotten to the end of trips and thought, this is exactly how it's supposed to be, I guess. And there's no parade. There's no interviews lined up, immediately. There's no news reporting. It's kind of just keeping going.
And that's the way I wanted it, really. I didn't want, any fanfare. And the trip was really low key. At that time, I wasn't sponsored at that time, and I really didn't want to be because, with that comes a responsibility, of course. And I wasn't big on this was in 2010, so I wasn't big on Facebook at all. And social media, is really just starting to come around, I think. So it was actually really kind of refreshing. I'm getting ready to do the Inside Passage again. So 2020 will, of course, be the 10-year anniversary of my first big trip. And it'll be interesting to see how the Inside Passage has changed and how I've changed. And, there will, of course, be social media involved, and Exped is now sponsoring me, which has evolved into this wonderful, wonderful collaboration. But yeah, it's kind of a different mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so what is, are you going to do kind of the similar route and try to recreate the trip as much as possible? Is there any new twist on this? How is it going to be?
Yeah, I think I'm going to put a twist on it. I've got about a year to figure that out, but I don't think I'm going to be quite as linear as I was last time, where I just paddled from A to B to Z until, I pretty much just ran out of ocean. I want to start here in the Puget Sound and relive some of that nostalgia. And then I think I'm going to do a little ferry hopping and skip a few sections, because what I've got my sights on is way up in the Alaskan Panhandle, further west. We're starting to get pretty remote. There's what they refer to as the ABCs. So there are three massive islands, Admiralty Island, Baranof Island, and Chickenoff Island. And I've got my sights set on Baranof, which is where Sitka is. And the ferries, the Alaska Ferry does make a trip to Sitka once a week. And so I think that's going to be like the grand finale. And I want to get myself over there and circumnavigate Sitka, which will be about a 400-mile circumnavigation around that island. And the west side of Baranof is really exposed to the Pacific Ocean. It's not like, the inside of the Inside Passage, where you're mostly protected with those tens of thousands of islands. So this is like really exposed terrain there. So it's going to be a new challenge for me, for sure.
Wow. And now you also have a purpose behind this, right?
For sure. So there was a couple of gals who kayaked the Inside Passage last year. They flew in from Australia, two Aussies in their early 20s, and they paddled from Glacier Bay, which is just a little northwest of Juneau, all the way down to Victoria on Vancouver Island. And they've been living plastic free in their, everyday lives for 3 years. And so their challenge was to transfer that lifestyle to their adventure, to their expedition. And they did. And I followed them on their blog and their social media, and they now travel all over and give slideshow presentations. And they, all the garbage that they generated from their 3-month trip, you could hold in the palm of your hand. And so
wow.
they came, and so they didn't use, like, usually my go-to, my knee-jerk reaction is, I think, is most people when they're getting ready for a trip, is Ziploc bags. Let's go to Costco and, get gallon size, snack size, quart size Ziploc bags. Everything goes into this plastic, right? And they didn't do that. They used wax wraps. They used gunny sacks. They used butcher paper, newspaper, things that they could burn, because what they had said that really hit home with me is that every single piece of plastic that has ever been created still exists on this planet, right? We all know that plastic doesn't break down, and this huge issue we have with marine pollution with plastic in our oceans, and that they're saying by 2050 there's going to be more plastic in our oceans than fish. So these gals have really inspired me to try to emulate what they did. I don't know if I'll be able to go exclusively plastic free like they did, but for me, it's more about becoming aware of the small changes I can make in my daily life and to help our environment, and extending, like they did, extending those changes to my outdoor adventures and trying to be a part of the better good, these versus being part of the problem. So, we'll see how that all plays out, but I'm really excited about that, bringing sort of a message along with me this time. Whereas when I did it in 2010, it was, I didn't have any message or mission that I was on other than just to get myself to Juneau, Alaska. So hopefully I can raise awareness this time around.
Yeah. And you know, I want to say you did have, maybe it wasn't a message for, you know, something like that, but you had a great reason to go, and that's what I always love. I love doing my trips for a cause. Not all of them, about half of them, and the other half are just because I need like you said, a restart button. I need to mix something up and get out of this funk.
Yeah.
So did you? And you know, I meant to ask this earlier, but I'd love to know: did you see any evidence of like trash or just waste or anything just really unexpected like that you were like, wow, I didn't expect to see that out here?
Yeah, not so much. Not in 2010. I did see some trash, some plastic floating up on the beaches, some marine debris, but you know, nothing like in the last couple of years, or last 5, 6, 7 years, how it's really impact has gotten, you know, so much worse. I spent a lot of time paddling in remote wilderness coastlines. I'm not doing these 1,000-mile trips, but I am still out there, and so I see firsthand now how plastic and marine debris are seriously, you know, impacting our coastlines. But on that trip, no, not so much, to be honest. That's
good news. That's good to hear. Awesome. But
yeah.
I hope it stays that way, or at least keeps going in that direction. So with this trip coming up in 2020, how are you going to be posting anywhere? And if so, how can people follow you?
Yeah. So my website, SusanMarieConrad.com, I've got a blog on there, and I'll probably be posting updates on that, and on my Facebook page, and all those links to my social media are front and center on my homepage. And then I'll probably use some sort of a tracking device, either with Spot has a tracking device, or Garmin has what's called InReach, where, you know, friends and family can log on to Google Earth or Google Maps and follow you. So I'll be sharing that URL with people, and if they're interested, they can see where I'm at in real time at any given time. And if that little bouncing orange ball is moving, then they can probably deduce that I'm still alive and moving.
Good.
It's a nice feature. It's a nice feature for the nervous Nellies that, especially on my 2010 trip, that were convinced that I was going to perish on this. That was peace of mind for them to be able to log on and see that at least my tracking device was still moving.
You know, it's surprising how many people feel the need to come and tell you that I think you're going to die on adventures. It's like, wow, you haven't talked to me in years, and thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's that. Or are you crazy?
Are you crazy? What are you doing? You can't be doing that. Just it's funny how what it draws out in people that are around you. It's very awesome. But wow, well, congratulations. I know it was almost 10 years ago now, but fantastic work. I hope it was the restart button for you and your life since in the last decade. That is incredible, and I aspire to do it one day myself. I think it'd be incredible. Sounds awesome. Yeah, it was life-changing, profoundly life-changing. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my story. Yeah, no worries. I really appreciate it. This was awesome. I can't wait to show people, you know, send them to your website to look at pictures, because it's unbelievable, the scenery and the entire experience. I can't even imagine. So thank you. It's a magical place. Thank you. Yeah. And all right, we'll be in touch when it comes out. Okay. Sounds like a plan. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Right. Bye. Bye-bye. First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to growing the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.